Something just changed in Cleveland, and most people didn't even notice it at first. Just a few days ago, the conversation around Shedeur Sanders was full of doubt. Analysts questioned whether he'd start, reporters pushed different narratives, and some even suggested the Browns weren't fully committed to him. But almost overnight, that entire story flipped. Now suddenly, insiders are saying it's his job to lose. So what happened? Because this wasn't just a random shift in opinion. This came after key moves by the Browns, quiet signals from inside the organization, and one statement from a player that revealed more than it seemed on the surface. When you connect all the dots, a very clear picture starts to form, and it's not the one people were talking about a week ago. The Browns may not have officially announced anything yet, but their actions are starting to speak louder than words. And once you see what they've been doing behind the scenes, it becomes hard to ignore one simple truth. This team might have already chosen their quarterback. The first real clue didn't come from a press conference or a headline. It came from something much easier to overlook: free agency. When the Browns went out and made moves to strengthen their offensive line, most people saw it as a normal roster upgrade. Every team wants better protection, right? But if you look a little closer, the timing and focus of those moves tell a much more specific story. Teams don't just invest heavily in the offensive line for no reason. They do it when they're preparing to protect someone important. And in this case, that someone is starting to become very obvious. Over the past few seasons, one of the biggest issues for quarterbacks, especially young ones, has been protection. Without time in the pocket, even the most talented players struggle to perform. So when a front office prioritizes building up the offensive line, it usually means they're trying to create the right environment for their quarterback to succeed. That's where things get interesting. Because if the Browns were truly unsure about their quarterback situation, they likely would have approached free agency differently. They might have focused more on defense, depth, or even bringing in stronger competition at the quarterback position. But they didn't. Instead, they made moves that directly support a young quarterback stepping into a starting role: stronger protection, better structure, a more stable offense. That's not a coincidence. It's a signal. Front offices rarely come out and say, "This is our guy," especially before the season begins. But they show it through their decisions. And right now, the Browns' decisions are pointing in one direction. They're building an offense designed for Shedeur Sanders. And when a team starts building around a player like that, it usually means the internal decision has already been made, even if it hasn't been officially announced yet. But as revealing as those moves were, they still left room for interpretation. Because roster decisions can always be explained in different ways. What made things even clearer was when someone inside the locker room finally spoke, and what he said gave fans a much more direct look at what's really going on behind the scenes. Then came the moment that made everything feel a lot less like speculation, and a lot more like confirmation. When new Browns offensive lineman Tytus Howard was asked about Shedeur Sanders, his response sounded simple on the surface. He called him confident, talented, and a strong leader. He mentioned following his journey since college and said he's excited to work with him. At first glance, that sounds like a normal teammate giving respect to a young quarterback. But if you listen closely, there's something deeper in the way he said it. Howard didn't speak like someone unsure about who his quarterback might be. He didn't sound like a player preparing for an open competition or waiting to see how things play out. Instead, he spoke with a level of certainty, as if he already knows who he's going to be protecting this season. And that matters more than people realize. Offensive linemen have a unique perspective inside a team. Their entire job depends on the quarterback. They need to build chemistry, understand tendencies, and trust the person they're protecting every single snap. Because of that, They usually don't speak so confidently about a quarterback unless they believe that player is going to be the guy. And Howard didn't just compliment Sanders, he went a step further. He said he's excited to block for him. That one line carries weight, because it suggests expectation, not possibility. It sounds like a player already preparing for a season where Shedeur Sanders is leading the offense, not competing for the role, not waiting for a decision, but stepping into it. And when a veteran offensive lineman talks like that, it usually reflects what's being discussed behind closed doors. Players talk. They hear things in meetings, locker rooms, and team environments that never make it to the public. So when someone like Howard speaks with that level of confidence, it often hints at what the organization is leaning toward internally. But even with that, some people still weren't fully convinced. Because one player's opinion can always be seen as just that, an opinion. What really changed everything was when the media itself started saying the same thing. What really made this situation impossible to ignore wasn't just what players were saying. It was what the media started saying next. Because almost overnight, the tone around Shedeur Sanders completely changed. Just days earlier, many reporters were questioning whether he was truly ready. Some were pushing the idea of competition, others were leaving the door open for different quarterback options, and a few were openly skeptical about him being the clear starter. But now, those same voices are saying something very different. Multiple Browns reporters have begun stating that it's Shedeur Sanders' job to lose. And that phrase matters more than it sounds. Because in the NFL, there's a huge difference between competing for the job and it's your job to lose. One means the team is still undecided. The other means the decision is already leaning heavily in one direction. And right now, it's clear which direction that is. This wasn't a slow transition either. It didn't take weeks of training camp reports or preseason games to change opinions. The narrative flipped quickly, and that's what caught people's attention. When media coverage shifts that fast, it usually means something changed behind the scenes. Reporters don't just wake up and randomly change their stance. They base their opinions on information coming from inside the organization, conversations, observations, and subtle signals that most fans never get to see. So when multiple insiders start aligning on the same message, it's rarely a coincidence. It's a reflection of what they're hearing. And right now, what they're hearing seems to point in one direction. The Browns are preparing for Shedeur Sanders to be their starting quarterback. But there's another layer to this that makes it even more interesting. Some reporters even hinted that people outside Cleveland don't fully understand what's happening. That national media narratives might not match the reality inside the building or within the fan base. In other words, while the outside world is still debating, Cleveland may have already made up its mind. And if that's true, then this situation is no longer about speculation. It's about timing. Because once the media starts aligning with the players, the official announcement usually isn't far behind. But here's the part that really confirms everything. When you look at the roster moves, the locker room voices, and now the media shift together, one question starts to disappear completely. Was there ever really a quarterback competition at all? At this point, when you line everything up, the roster moves, the player comments, and now the media shift, it leads to one uncomfortable but obvious question. Was there ever actually a real quarterback competition? Because if you look at how the Browns handled this offseason, the answer is starting to look like no. Think about it. When teams truly want competition at quarterback, they make it clear through their actions. They bring in strong alternatives. They create uncertainty. They give fans and players a real debate about who might start. But Cleveland didn't do that. They didn't go out and sign a major quarterback who could realistically challenge Shedeur Sanders. They didn't create a crowded QB room filled with serious contenders. Instead, they stayed relatively quiet at the position. And in the NFL, silence can be very loud. Because when a team chooses not to bring in competition, it usually means they already trust what they have. In this case, that trust appears to be in Shedeur. Now publicly, teams will always keep things open-ended. Coaches will say things like, "Everyone has to earn their spot," or "We'll evaluate as we go." That's standard language across the league. But behind the scenes, decisions are often made much earlier than fans realize. And the Browns' actions suggest that decision may have already happened. The offensive line upgrades, built to protect him. The lack of quarterback signings, no real challenge. The locker room comments, confidence not uncertainty. The media shift, alignment with what's happening internally. Put it all together, and it doesn't look like a competition. It looks like a plan. And that plan seems to revolve around giving Shedeur Sanders the best possible setup to succeed in his first season as the leader of the offense. But here, where it gets even more interesting. Because while the organization hasn't officially said it, someone inside that locker room already spoke about this situation weeks ago. And at the time, most people didn't fully realize how important it was. Now, looking back, it feels like that moment gave away the entire story before anyone else caught on. Long before the media started changing its tone, and even before the off-season moves made things obvious, one person inside the Browns' locker room had already said exactly what was going to happen. Myles Garrett. And when a player like him speaks, people usually listen. This isn't just another voice in the locker room. Garrett is the face of the franchise on the defensive side, a leader and someone who understands exactly how things operate inside that building. He's been through different seasons, different quarterbacks, and different organizational shifts. So when he said that it's Shedeur Sanders' job to lose, it wasn't just a casual comment. It was a signal. At the time, some people brushed it off. They treated it like a player showing support for a teammate or just giving a positive answer in an interview. But looking back now, with everything that's happened since, that statement feels completely different. It feels like he already knew. Because players inside the locker room often have a much clearer picture than the outside world. They see how reps are distributed, how coaches communicate, and how the team is preparing behind closed doors. They don't need official announcements. They can feel the direction the organization is heading. And Garrett's comment sounded like someone who had already seen that direction. What makes it even more important is the timing. He said it before the media narrative flipped, before reporters started aligning, before fans began connecting all the dots. In a way, he revealed the outcome before the rest of the story unfolded. And now, everything is catching up to that one statement. The offensive line moves, support it. Tytus Howard's comments reinforce it. The media shift confirms it. All of it points back to what Garrett said from the beginning, which raises an even bigger point. Sometimes the most accurate information doesn't come from headlines or debates. It comes from the people actually inside the situation. And in this case, one of the most respected voices in the Browns' locker room already made it clear. The rest of the world is just now starting to realize it. But that also brings up another important question. If the players already knew, and now the media is catching on, why did the narrative stay so wrong for so long? Now here, where things get really interesting. If the signs were already there, if players like Myles Garrett hinted at it early, and if the organization's moves clearly pointed in one direction, then why did so many people get it wrong in the first place? The answer comes down to one thing: distance. A lot of the early narratives didn't come from people inside Cleveland. They came from national voices, analysts, shows, and commentators who don't see the day-to-day reality of the team. And because of that, they were working with incomplete information. From the outside, the situation looked uncertain. There was a young quarterback, a team in transition, questions about the roster, so naturally the national conversation leaned toward doubt. It's the safer take. It creates debate, and honestly, it's what people expect when a rookie is involved. But inside Cleveland, the picture seems to have been very different. Local reporters, players, and those closer to the team have slowly started aligning on the same message. And that's where the shift is coming from. It's not that the story suddenly changed. It's that people are finally catching up to what was already happening behind the scenes. There's also another factor that plays into this. Controversy drives attention. When a player like Shedeur Sanders enters the league with a big name, strong personality, and massive spotlight, it naturally creates divided opinions. Some people lean into the hype, others push back against it. That tension fuels discussions, debates, and content. And for a while, that debate overshadowed the actual reality of the situation. Instead of focusing on what the Browns were doing, the conversation stayed stuck on opinions, what people thought might happen rather than what the team was actually building toward. But eventually, reality always catches up. And that's what we're seeing now. The moves, the comments, the internal signals, they've become too consistent to ignore. The narrative isn't being debated anymore. It's being corrected. Which leads to the final piece of this entire story. Because when you step back and look at everything together, it doesn't just look like the Browns are giving Shedeur a chance. It looks like they're building something specifically around him. At this point, when you connect every move, every comment, and every shift in narrative, one thing becomes clear. This isn't just about giving Shedeur Sanders an opportunity. This looks like a team that is actively building around him. Start with the offensive line moves. That wasn't just about improving the roster. It was about creating stability in front of the quarterback. Teams know that young QBs develop faster when they're protected. Time in the pocket leads to better decisions, more confidence, and overall growth. Then look at what hasn't been done. The Browns didn't bring in a serious quarterback competitor. They didn't create a crowded room or introduce uncertainty. Instead, they removed distractions and made the path clearer. That's not how teams act when they're undecided. That's how teams act when they're preparing for a specific outcome. And it doesn't stop there. There's already talk about adding more weapons, especially at wide receiver. That's another key sign. When a team starts thinking about upgrading pass catchers while also strengthening protection, it usually means they're focused on maximizing a quarterback's potential. It's a full offensive plan. Protection, weapons, stability. Everything a young quarterback needs to succeed. And when you look at it from that perspective, the Browns' offseason starts to make a lot more sense. These aren't random upgrades. They're connected moves that all point in the same direction. They're setting the stage. Now, none of this guarantees success. The NFL doesn't work that way. Talent still has to translate on the field. Decisions still have to be made under pressure. And Shedeur Sanders will still have to prove that he can perform at the highest level week after week. But what matters right now is the intention behind these moves. Because teams don't invest like this unless they believe in the player. And right now, everything the Browns are doing suggests they believe in Shedeur. Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. Because while the team hasn't made an official announcement yet, their actions might have already said everything that needs to be said. When you step back and look at the full picture, it's hard to ignore what's really happening here. This isn't just hype, it isn't just media speculation, and it definitely isn't a coincidence. The Browns' moves, the locker room voices, and the sudden shift in media narratives are all pointing in the same direction. And when that many signals align at once, it usually means one thing: the decision has already been made. They just haven't said it out loud yet. Think about everything we've seen. The offensive line upgrades designed to protect a young quarterback. The absence of real competition at the position. Tytus Howard speaking with confidence about blocking for Shedeur. Myles Garrett calling it his job to lose before anyone else. And now, reporters finally catching up and saying the same thing. That's not random. That's a pattern. And in the NFL, patterns like this almost always lead to one outcome. Shedeur Sanders is about to be the guy. Now, of course, none of this means the journey will be easy. The expectations are already building. Fans are invested. The spotlight is getting brighter by the day. And once the season starts, everything will come down to performance. Because in this league, belief only lasts as long as results back it up. But what's different here is how fast all of this has come together. Most rookies spend years earning this kind of trust. Shedeur might have it before his first full season even begins. And if that momentum carries onto the field, Cleveland could be entering a completely new era, one built around a quarterback the city has already chosen. So the real question now is whether Shedeur will get the opportunity. It's what he does with it once it's officially his.